You know, it's funny how you can hear or read the same thing over and over and over again, dozens or hundreds of times, and not until that one time that you read it do you finally realize something different about what it is that you read. Take John 15, for example, where Jesus is talking about, excuse me, where Jesus is talking about loving others and how we're to love our brothers and how we're to love those that are in the world. Jesus said, "As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you." Skimmed over that verse a million times looking at it, but Jesus in that verse tells us how to love others. In the same way that God, the Father, loved the Son, He loved us, and thus we are to love other people. Now, that being said, think about, well, I'll just ask you this. Mr. Stan, how many months have 28 days? All of them, right? This means yes. No. Okay. Come on, Stan. All of them have 28 days, right? If it's got 30 days, it's got 28. Smith is the most common name in America. You know why there's so many Smiths in the phone book? They all have telephones. I know it's early. Some of y'all are going to get these later. Turn over to 1 Samuel chapter 17. We're going to take our study from there this morning. Hopefully, a story that we've heard and read for a very long time might be able to teach us something a little bit new today. We've heard this story since VBS. My 5-year-old loves this story. He can tell you this story verbatim. Maybe not verbatim, but he can hit you the high points. Who was David? What did he do? Well, he killed a giant. What was the giant's name? Goliath. He can tell you all that. So we're going to look at it. We're going to do some work with 1 Samuel 17. We might belabor some points a little bit, and we're going to probably only make one application. And that application is what you are matters. When I try to teach expository lessons, which is taking a scripture or a passage and trying to break it down, and really anyone that teaches expositorily tries to look for three things in essence. You try to look for facts. That's putting text in context. That's who, what, when, where, how big, how long, how many. That's who wrote it, who did they write it to, what was going on when they wrote it, where did they write it to, all those things. And when you finally get the facts, you get the context of what's going on. The facts lead to concepts. And the concepts, those are the eternal principles that are inherent in all of our biblical stories. Then once we have those concepts, those lead to application. So we're going to look at some facts this morning about 1 Samuel 17, hit a couple concepts, and probably, like I said, only make one application. So let's read together 1 Samuel chapter 17. Now the Philistines gathered their forces of war at Sokah in Judah and camped between Sokah and Azekah in Ephes-Dammim. Saul and the men of Israel gathered and camped in the valley of Elah, and they lined up in battle formation to face the Philistines. The Philistines were standing on one hill, and the Israelites were standing on another hill with a valley between them. And a champion named Goliath from Gath came out from the Philistine camp. He was 9 feet 9 inches tall and wore a bronze helmet and bronze scale armor that weighed 125 pounds. There was bronze armor on his shins, and a bronze sword was slung between his shoulders. His spear shaft was like a weaver's beam, and the iron point of his spear weighed 15 pounds. In addition, a shield bearer was walking in front of him. He stood and shouted to the Israelite battle formations, "Why do you come out here and light up in battle formation?" he asked them. "Am I not a Philistine, and you not servants of Saul? Choose one of your men and have them come down against me. If he wins in a fight against me and kills me, we will be your servants. But if I win and kill him, then you will be our servants." Then the Philistines said, "I defy the ranks of Israel today. Send me a man so we can fight each other." When Saul and all Israel heard these words from the Philistine, they lost their courage and were terrified. So, setting the scene a little bit, we've got your typical Old Testament warfare, which is very different than today's warfare, what you might call modern warfare. We have very elaborate and sophisticated weapons. Anybody familiar with the Barrett brothers from Murfreesboro, Tennessee? Back in 1980, the Barrett brothers developed the M82 50 caliber sniper rifle. It's got up to today, I believe it was late 2017, early 2018, this rifle has recorded confirmed kills of over 2 miles in distance. This is some of the things that modern military uses today. Another thing that I've seen in my time in the military is what's called the Phalanx CIWS. That's close-in weapon system. And what this thing is, it's a big dome. It's a big metal dome with a gun that has a rotary barrel coming out of the bottom of it. It looks like R2-D2 on steroids, if you're familiar with Star Wars. This thing is huge. It fires a 20 by 102 millimeter shell in rapid succession, and the point of it is to try to take out airborne threats that are threatening U.S. military, whether it be on a ship or whether it be in Iraq. We had one on our base in Iraq that could triangulate a mortar round or a missile in the air and shoot it out of the air before it's able to hit the ground. We also have this thing called the ANPAS-13B. That's a lot of letters. But what it is it's a thermal weapon sight. You can mount it on a weapon, you can mount it on a machine gun, and you can actually see people's heat signatures. You can either see it in what's called white hot or black hot, meaning that when you look through the lens and you pick up someone's heat signature, they either show up as a white dot or a black dot, depending on what setting you have it on. Cool thing about that is, did you know your body leaves a thermal imprint whenever you touch something? So if I was to walk along that back wall and put my hand down it for probably 4 or 5 minutes, my handprint can be picked up on the wall by some sort of thermal imaging system. And these are some of the things that our modern military uses, and these are just some things that I'm able to talk about. There are plenty of things that are classified that if I did tell you about, I probably wouldn't be around tomorrow. Now, biblical and ancient warfare was obviously not like this. Imagine what the Midianites would have done if they had access to this thermal imaging stuff when Gideon showed up. Probably would have been a much different fight. So you've got the two armies lining up on either hill here in the valley of Elah. And they say, Samuel says that there's the valley between them. And some in this battle formation, some might have a rod, a stick, some might have a spear or a stone sword. Think about if you go to Walmart or you go to Dick's Sporting Goods and you buy the cheapest machete they've had, you have in your hand better steel than they had in biblical times. Even up to probably the 4th century BC, you've got a better weapon than what the Israelite army had here in 1 Samuel 17. So not only would some have rods or spears or stone swords, some would even have tall poles with banners on them. We've commonly referred to as guidons for those that have been in the military. Guidons, they're formations use them to try to remind people during a battle of what's around them. in this situation or in this time, they probably would have had some sort of animal mascot on them. You think every tribe of Israel had some form of animal mascot. That's why Jesus is known as the Lion and the Lamb. He's the Lion of Judah because he's from the tribe of Judah, but he's also the sacrificial lamb for the Passover. That's where you get this terminology of Jesus being the Lion and the Lamb. You know, some might even have some in this formation might even have bows, or they might have javelins, or they might have sling stones or something like that. But eventually, a trumpet is going to sound, and both of these armies on either side of this hill are going to run down into the valley, and they're going to start fighting each other. If you've ever seen the movie Braveheart, this is the first thing that comes to my mind. These medieval battle situations or these medieval battle scenes where you've just got foot soldiers against foot soldiers and swords in hand and people riding horses and just chopping at each other and just going to town. That's kind of what this would have looked like. To get a good idea of Old Testament battles, go to Walmart and get you that machete. Go out to a field somewhere, find you a pine tree that's been laid over. Take you that cheap machete, straddle that pine tree, and start trying to knock limbs off of the pine tree with it. See how far you can get before, one, you're either really exhausted, because that takes a lot of energy to swing that machete, trying to knock the limbs off of this pine tree. Now, when you think about the stamina that it takes to do something like that, or to even fight for long periods of time, think about professional MMA fighters. Professional MMA fighters only fight 3 5-minute rounds in a regular bout, in a regular fight. People like Georges St. Pierre, they only fight 3 5-minute rounds in a regular fight. In a championship fight, they might go as long as 5 5-minute rounds. These are elite cardio machines, guys that work out every day and get paid to do that, and they only let them fight for 25 minutes at a time. Fighting hand to hand, using your body in a fight is very, very exhausting. So try to knock as many of those limbs off before you're just completely exhausted. And as you're going down this pine tree trying to knock these limbs off, the first time that the knife comes out of your hand or slips out of your hand, you're dead. The first time that you go to knock that limb off and it doesn't sever all the way through, you're dead. The first time you go to knock a limb off and it gets stuck and it grabs and you can't pull it out of the wood, you're dead. That's how these battle situations went. So imagine you're down there in the fight, you're in the battle, you're cutting, you're stabbing, you're thrusting, and you look up for your banner because you want to be around where your people are. You want to be around your tribe. You know, they didn't have jerseys with the Star of David on them, you know. They couldn't look around and see Bob from Ephraim over here and try to go fight close to him. No, they had to look up and try to see where their tribe was and try to get close to them. Because imagine you're in this fight, you're in amongst all these people, probably thousands of people fighting, and it's just chaos, and you look around and, oh no, now I'm surrounded by Philistines. I'm in a heap of trouble. I want to get back to where my banner is. Israel didn't have what you would call an actual standing army until later in the Davidic dynasty. So one thing to keep in mind when you're reading Old Testament stories, when it comes to battles and warfare, one thing to keep in mind is a lot of these guys are farmers, ranchers, shepherds, builders that were called up to war. You think about the United States Army when it came time for the American Revolution. The majority of the army at the time were called up farmers, were militiamen, minutemen if you would. It's the same thing here. Now, back to the scene here. You've got one army on one hill, you've got one army on another hill, and a guy walks out. Keep in mind, this is a professional soldier. A trained man will kill an untrained man with monotonous regularity. Samuel makes it a point to tell us that Goliath was a trained soldier from his youth. Goliath walks out and he says, "Do you guys have a champion? Hey, Israel, servants of Saul, do y'all have a champion? I'm a champion here in Philistia. I'm the champion of the Philistines. Y'all are servants of Saul. Send someone out to fight me. That way we don't all have to go down here into this meat grinder and kill each other." Champion fights were a regular thing up until the 4th century BC. And Goliath comes out and makes this challenge every morning and every evening for 40 days. And he's defying Israel every time he comes out. "I dare you to send someone out and fight me." Now the problem with this guy is his stats. So you see Goliath standing across this hill, and he comes out in front of the Philistine army, and he's overpowering to look at. The Bible says that he's 6 cubits and a span in height. Who remembers how much a cubit is? The actual definition, not the approximated measurement. Right, so a cubit was the distance from the bend of your elbow to the tip of your finger. Who remembers what a span is? I'm showing it to you. The span is the distance from your thumb, the point of your thumb to the point of your little finger with your hand all spread out like that. And 2 cubits are supposed to always equal, or 2 spans equal a cubit. So he's roughly 6.5 cubits tall. Now, measurements like that during monarchical periods were standardized by whoever the king was. Saul was the king of Israel, and he was told to be head and shoulders above everyone in Israel. So you think with Saul being as tall as they probably said he was, or at least taller than everyone in Israel, it was probably a good time to buy rope and lumber, right? Because you got more for your money at that time. So he was anywhere from cubits at the time were probably anywhere from 18 to 21 inches long. So if that's the case, at the shortest Goliath was, he was 9 feet tall. Think about that for a minute. 9 feet tall. To try to put that into perspective, imagine you're at a local basketball game and the announcer comes over the PA and says, "Now playing center for Philistia, Goliath from Gath." And Goliath steps out and stands up under the basketball goal, and his face is in the net. That's how tall this guy is. That's a 9-foot tall person. He can dunk over anybody. He can block shots better than Dikembe Mutombo ever could, you know. Now at the tallest, if we're talking 21 inches per cubit, at the tallest, this guy is 11 feet. Imagine that. Most rooms, you know, most standard rooms have ceilings that are what, about 10 feet high? Between 8 and 10 feet high? At the tallest Goliath was, he was 11 feet. Now, if Goliath of Gath shows up at the Philistia basketball game and he comes out and he's being announced and he tries to stand up under the basketball goal, he's going to have to duck to get under the backboard and try to stand up, and his shoulders are going to catch the rim. That's how tall an 11-foot guy would be. It would be almost unfair to let somebody that tall play. Bible says he had a coat of mail armor. Now, mail armor could be either overlapping plates of metal, which is what we commonly refer to today as dragon skin armor. There were some guys some contractors when I was in Iraq that had dragon skin armor. That's kind of what that is. Or when it refers to mail armor, it could be interlocking chains of metal, like you'd see chain mail armor. You think about, again, movies like Braveheart or these medieval war movies where you've got knights and everything in that kind of that chain linking armor would be similar to what Goliath might have been wearing. And this thing weighs 125 pounds. Y'all, Goliath is walking into battle with Justin Bieber on his shoulders and not thinking a thing about it. He says that his spear, the end of his spear, weighs approximately 15 pounds. We're talking about a high school track and field shot put on the end of his spear. And the shaft of his spear is that of a weaver's beam. Anybody know what a weaver's beam is? Because I had to do a little research on it. So if you think about a loom, what they use to weave clothing together, to weave cloth together, the beam for the loom has to be something that's extremely strong, both at the top and the bottom, in order to hold the tightness of this cloth as it's being woven. So think about, say, like the handle of a sledgehammer or the handle of a wood cutting axe. You know, something that's got about a 8 to 12 pound head on it. And say you hold it out like this at the base where it's just standing straight up. That's about what Goliath had. And he's able to hold it in the middle here, this long wooden spear with a shot put on the end of it, and he's able to hold it in the middle of it and wield it and utilize it and manipulate it in such a way that it would almost be like a mop handle in our hands. Bible says he had bronze greaves on his legs, or he had bronze coverings on his shins. So you couldn't hamstring him. You couldn't take out the back of his legs. Now, a smart rule in fighting someone bigger than you, take out their legs. Why is that a smart rule? Because, well, then they're easier to talk to. They're at eye level. It also says that he had a bronze javelin between his shoulders. Now, javelin could be, I know we think of a javelin, we think of like a throwing spear, or something in track and field where you'd run a little ways and you'd throw. In this context, it could either be like a backup weapon that's made out of metal, like a sword. Some translations see it as a sword, or it could have been another plate of metal that Goliath had on his back so that he couldn't have been sniped or assassinated from behind. Now, all of that in mind, it's kind of easy to understand why the Hebrews didn't want to deal with him. You see this guy coming out, he's between 9 feet and 11 feet tall, wearing all of this armor with all of these weapons, with forearms probably as big as my thighs. And he comes out and he stands in front of this army and he says, "I dare you to send someone. Send someone out here to fight me." And he does this for 40 days. Morning and night for 40 days. Defying the armies of Israel. Now, back to the text. It literally changes. Samuel literally changes from out on the battlefield to meanwhile back at the ranch. Let's start in verse 12. Now David was the son of the Ephraite from Bethlehem of Judah named Jesse. Jesse had 8 sons, and during Saul's reign was already an old man. Jesse's 3 oldest sons had followed Saul to the war, and their names were Eliab, the firstborn, Abinadab was next, and Shammah the third, and David was the youngest. The 3 oldest had followed Saul, but David kept going back and forth from Saul to tend his father's flock in Bethlehem. Every morning and evening for 40 days, the Philistine came forward and took his stand. One day, Jesse had told his son David, "Take this half bushel of roasted grain along with these loaves of bread for your brothers and hurry to their camp. Also take these 10 portions of cheese to the field commanders. Check on the welfare of your brothers and bring a confirmation from them. They are with Saul and all the men of Israel in the valley of Elah fighting the Philistines." So David got up early in the morning, left the flock with someone to keep it, loaded up, and set out as Jesse has instructed him. He arrived at the perimeter of the camp as the army was marching out to its battle formation, shouting their battle cry. And I think about this teenage Jewish boy. His job was a shepherd. He was a sheep keeper. Y'all know I like audience interaction when I teach, so I want to pose a question to everyone. What was the worst summer job you ever had? I worked in a tire shop one summer when I was growing up. One day. That was it. In a tire shop? Yeah. Oh, man. Anybody else bad summer jobs? Picking up trash. What's a drive-in? I know what a drive-in is. I'm not that old, not that young. Sorry? Picking up square-baled hay. I bet that was a hard job. A lot of manual labor in that, probably in the heat of the day too. Any other bad summer jobs? David was a shepherd. His full-time job was keeping sheep. How exciting. Does anyone remember the old black and white shows and movies about people that rode sheep across the Midwest? No, you don't, because they don't make movies about people who keep sheep because they're dumb animals. They're mind-numbingly stupid animals. They're boring. They're dumb. Could you imagine a stampede of sheep? Bah. That's it. That's all you got. Everything that eats sheep. There are meals on wheels in the animal kingdom, okay? There are snacks on the go. A friend of mine that did actually keep sheep for a while said a bird of prey can land on a sheep's head and peck their eyes out, and the sheep can't do anything about it. Just mind-numbingly ignorant animals. David writes Psalm 23. Well, by the way, why did David write so many psalms? Had a lot of time on his hands. He was a sheep keeper. But he writes in Psalm 23, "The Lord is my shepherd. You lead me into green pastures." Have you ever seen a sheep graze? They don't just nip the top of the grass like, say, a deer would, but they eat everything. They pull the grass up, roots and all. David says, "You lead me into green pastures." When a sheep goes to eat, they destroy the fields and the pastures where they eat. So you either have to go to a new pasture or further out into the field every day, or if you start the beginning of the season, beginning of the growing season, you can start out in the far reaches of the field and kind of work your way back. Either way, you've got to have green pastures in order for your sheep to eat. David says, "You lead me beside still waters." A sheep's not going to drink from a running river. Remember, everything that eats sheep. They're very paranoid, so they hear this running water, and I'm not sticking my head down there. Stick my head down there and get taken off. Ain't doing that. David says, "You anoint my head with oil." A sheep will stand out in a field and eat and eat and eat until it has a heat stroke, unless you pour oil on its head and keep it cool. David's job was to deal with these dumb animals all day long. Now in verse 17, Jesse comes to David with really good news and says, "Today you don't have to keep sheep. No, today you actually get to go out and see the army." The Bible says that the next morning, David got up early. A teenage boy got up early. Could you imagine that? Parents that have teenagers had teenage boys. Teenage boy got up early, gathered all of his things, and headed out to see the battle. And when he gets there, the army is marching out to battle. Let's get back into our text real quick. Look at verse 21. Israel and the Philistines had lined up in battle formation facing each other. So there they are again. Day 41 on each side of the hill looking at each other. David left his supplies in the care of the quartermaster and ran to the battle line. When he arrived, he asked his brothers how they were. So he's so excited. He gets here and he sees the Israelite army, and they're not just sitting in camp sharpening their weapons or training or anything like that. No, they're in battle formation and they're going out to fight. And David sees this and yes, this is so cool. Because imagine the stories that David grew up with. The stories that David grew up with when God's army goes out to fight, amazing things happen. God's army walks around a wall 7 times, yells, walls fall. God's army, outnumbered 400 to 1 with nothing but torches and pitchers and trumpets, are able to send the Midianite army into such a frenzy that they start killing each other. The army of Israel during the time of Moses, when they would fight, Moses would raise his hands and they would win. He'd put his hands down, they would lose. Moses had pretty much invented the wave. So as David walked with his brothers, Goliath comes out. And he's making his challenge again. Verse 23, and while he was speaking with them, suddenly the champion named Goliath, the Philistine from Gath, came forward from the Philistine battle line and shouted his usual words, which David heard. When all the Israelite men saw Goliath, they retreated and were terrified of him. So David comes to see this battle, to see his brothers. Goliath comes out, and the whole host of the Israelite army tuck tail and run. And David sees this. So David asks, what's going on? What's the point of this giant? What's his deal? In my mind, he starts interviewing people. So why are we afraid of this guy? Well, have you seen him? He's 9 feet tall. He's wearing 125-pound armor. He's got a tree for a spear. Look at him. And they start telling David about the rewards that will be bestowed on the man that kills this giant. So verse 25, previously an Israelite man had declared, do you see this man who keeps coming out? He comes to defy Israel. The king will make the man who kills him very rich and will give him his daughter. The king will also make the household of the man's father exempt from paying any taxes. Which one of those rewards do you think caught David's attention? Sorry. Which one of those rewards do you think caught David's attention? Hello, taxes, smaxes, money funny. King's daughter? Hey, now. Teenage boy out here with the Israelite army hears all this stuff and hears about the guy that kills this giant's going to get the king's daughter? Okay, where do I sign up? But David's brother overhears this conversation that David's having with these guys. And he's not very happy. Look at verse 28. Now David's older brother Eliab listened when he spoke to these men and became angry with him. Why did you come down here, he said. And with whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your arrogance and the insolence of your heart. You just came down here to see the battle. Now, when I think of Eliab in this sense, commonly we think of he's embarrassed, maybe. Because your little brother has just come out here and he's asking all of these guys what's going on and how, what's going to happen to the man that kills this giant, because this teenage kid, I'm going to go kill this giant. Some would think that Eliab is scared and he's trying to get onto David and he's insulting him. Well, he could be scared. Well, let me ask you this. How many in here have little brothers? Anybody? All right. Couple. Okay. All right. I'm going to pick on Banks for just a second. Banks, if your little brother goes and picks a fight with somebody, well, this might be a bad example. All right. For sake of analogy here, we're going to say that you're a good big brother. If your little brother goes and picks a fight with somebody, do you think it's your responsibility to go bail him out if he starts getting it handed to him? Yeah, right? Okay, thank you for answering like that. So Eliab sees David talking to these other Israelites about, I'm going to go down there and I'm going to beat this giant. This guy that's probably got 4 feet on me and probably a couple 100 pounds, I'm going to go out here and I'm going to beat him. And Eliab overhears this and says, what are you doing? What are you doing, you arrogant, insolent kid? You're not going to go out there and beat him. You're just a kid. You're just a boy. And by the way, where did you leave your sheep? He's so mad that he insults his little brother. He calls him prideful, arrogant, insolent. He says, you're not a giant killer. You're a shepherd. And not a very important shepherd at that. Where did you leave those few sheep? Guys, he's not a giant killer. He's a shepherd, and not a very important one at that. Now, we probably can't really relate to David's character. If we were to skip ahead in the story for just a minute, will it ruin it for anybody? We all pretty know this story pretty well. Flip over to chapter 17, start at verse 55 real quick. Now when Saul had seen David going out to confront the Philistine, he asked Abner, the commander of the army, whose son is this? My king, as surely as you live, I don't know, Abner replied. The king said, find out whose son this young man is. When David returned from killing the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the Philistine's head still in his hand. Saul said to him, whose son are you, young man? David answered, the son of your servant Jesse of Bethlehem. What's the best trophy you've ever had? This might sound kind of strange, but I'm actually very proud of the Lads Leaders trophies that I have. Some might have game balls that maybe you caught an interception in a football game and they gave you the game ball. Or maybe you won a district or a state championship and you've got a ring or you've got a trophy. Or maybe you've got a deer head hanging on your wall. It's a pretty good trophy in my opinion. David walks into Saul's tent, the king of Israel, and he's got the head of a giant in his hand. Y'all, the crystal football has no bearing, can't even measure up to what David just walked in to go to Saul's tent with. And Saul says, whose son are you? Or who are you, kid? What does David say? I'm the son of your servant Jesse. He's not arrogant. He's not prideful. He is who he is. So back to the story. Let's look back at verse 30. I know we don't have a lot of time left. Then he turned from those beside him to others in front of him and asked about the offer, and the people gave him the same answer as before. What David said was overheard and reported to Saul, so he had David brought to him. And David said to Saul, don't let anyone be discouraged by him. Your servant will fight the Philistine. But Saul replied, you can't go fight this Philistine. You're just a youth. He's been a warrior since he was young. David answered Saul, your servant has been tending his father's sheep. Whenever a lion or a bear came and carried off a lamb from the flock, I went after it and struck it down and rescued the lamb from its mouth. If it reared up against me, I would grab it by its fur and strike it down and kill it. Your servant has killed lions and bears. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, for he has defied the armies of the living God. So Saul puts this all call out for a giant killer. And this kid shows up. Okay, so we've got an opening for giant killer. Who wants the job? David steps up. I want the job. All right, son, what's your resume? I'm a shepherd. Let's try this again. Hey, we've got the opening for giant killer. Who wants the job? I want the job. Okay, what's your resume? I'm a shepherd. Kid, you don't really get what's going on here. You are a child. You're a kid, and this man has been a soldier since he was young. He's been a soldier longer than you've been alive. And David says, no, you don't understand. I'm a shepherd. I keep sheep. And everything that eats sheep. A lion came. I hunted it and grabbed it by its beard and rescued the sheep and killed the lion. Now, remember one thing about lions, they are biologically built to be killers. David says, I hunted one down, grabbed it by its beard, and killed it. He did the same thing to a bear. So, more probably reluctantly, Saul gives in and says, okay, you can wear my armor down there to fight. Now, either Saul is stupid, because remember, he's the tallest person in Israel. He's head and shoulders above everybody. He's about to give his armor to this kid. So he's either stupid, or David's pretty big for his age, or Saul's the smartest politician in the world at the time. Because if he sends his armor out here to fight, people are going to think it's him. Now, if he comes back, Saul's a hero, right? If David wears Saul's armor. But if he dies out there, no big deal. I can get more armor. I'm the king, right? But David doesn't take it. He says, I'm not going to wear this armor. I'm not going to take the armor of a king, but instead he takes the tools of a shepherd. A stick, a sling, and a bag of rocks. He gets out onto this field, and even Goliath insults him when he gets out on the field, right? He gets out there and Goliath says, who do you think I am that you send a boy out here with sticks to run me off like I'm some kind of dog? And then David gives his famous speech starting in verse 45. David said, you come against me with dagger, spear, and sword, but I come against you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel's armies. And you have defied him. Today, the Lord will hand you over to me. Today, I will strike you down, cut your head off, and give your corpse of the Philistine camp to the birds and to the creatures of the earth. Then all the world will know that Israel has a God, and this whole assembly will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord has won this battle and that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will hand you over to us. So we've got this story, right? I know we're out of time, but I want to make this quick application. Turn over to Psalm 78, and we're going to wrap this up. Psalm 78, starting in verse 70. What you are matters. Starting in verse 70, Psalm 78, he chose David his servant and took him from the sheepfolds. He brought him from tending ewes to be a shepherd over his people Jacob, over Israel his inheritance. He shepherded them with a pure heart and guided them with skillful hands. Remember, God did not take a shepherd and make him a king, or rather turn him into a king. God took a shepherd and let him shepherd a nation. With the tools and the skills that David had from being a shepherd, he was able to be one of the greatest leaders in Israel's history. What you are matters. If you take what's insignificant or what you believe to be insignificant about you and use it for God with skillful hands and integrity of heart, God will use that for big things. Think about David's sin with Bathsheba. And Nathan comes to him and he tells him what's going on, and he rebukes him. And what does he do? He tells him a sheep story. A man stole this guy's sheep, and David says, that man's got to die. David, you're that man. He tells him a sheep story. When God or an angel is about to strike Jerusalem in the latter part of 2 Samuel, David stands in front of them and says, they're not the ones who messed up, it's me. Don't hurt the sheep. Even long into David's reign as king, he still refers to Jerusalem, to the Israelites, as sheep. Give God what you consider to be insignificant and unimportant, and He will give you important things to do and be. When we think about our spiritual self-identity, we've got to realize that whatever I am matters because God gave me that certain skill set. And when we realize that and we give it to God with skill and integrity, He will show us what our purpose is. Thank y'all for your kind attention this morning. I apologize that we went over our time, but we'll be